rebuild the Beis Hamikdash. They're going to gather together to stop them and to destroy them. All the nations of the world, and the Medrash says, you see in quote number 10, there are several Medrashim that say clearly that the Jews are going to suffer partial defeat. And it's going to be a terrible time of nisayon, of a test to the Jewish people. Now we have a tradition, it says in Svarim, from the students, from the Talmidim of the Gra and from the Talmidim of the Baal Shem Tov, that when the prophets, Yechezkel and other prophets, when they spoke about this terrible war and the suffering that the Jews are going to go through right before Mashiach comes, they did not perceive or did not want to perceive that the duration of the Golus is going to last 2,000 years and going to be so difficult. So therefore, before Mashiach comes, the Jews, it's necessary for them to go through one more challenge before the actual Geula, before the actual redemption. However, the Gra and the Baal Shem Tov, they said, this is in the late 1700s, they said, since the Jews went through 1,700 years of bitter exile, went through so much suffering and persecution, it will totally not be necessary to have any more challenges. So therefore, they said the war of Gog and Magog won't occur. So we see what happened was, and this is, we're going just to go on. So what really happened? The terrible wars of Gog and Magog, which Jews are going to suffer, it did not occur. But what happened was it became softened in the fact that the nations of the world are trying to take parts of Eretz Yisrael. But not through a war. Jews are not really dying. Some Jews are, but not really in great amounts. But through peaceful means, they're trying to pressure the Jewish state to give back lands and give it back to Yishmael, and give it back to the Keiches of the Sitra Achra and the Shivim Umeis, including Yerushalayim. So we're experiencing now the war of Gog and Magog in a very, very modified, in a very, very subtle way, but it's still a war of Gog and Magog, and it's still an Nisayon. Now, what does Mashiach come into this whole picture? Gog and Magog fights against Mashiach. Why do they want to take away Eretz Yisrael? Because Mashiach is going to come and rebuild the Beis Hamikdash and reestablish a Jewish empire. And the 70 nations of the world, Amalek within the 70 nations wants to try to stop them. The power of Amalek is behind this whole peace treaty, who is trying to rip away parts of Eretz Yisrael, explicitly Yerushalayim. Why Yerushalayim? So Mashiach cannot build a Beis Hamikdash and begin the process of Geula. Now, when I first started learning about Mashiach, I heard that there are people who identify Mashiach. This whole thing was very difficult to me. It's a very difficult thing to relate to, simply because we were always under the impression that Mashiach is going to come in a very miraculous way. As I explained to you before, Mashiach we see that now the redemption unfolded in a very natural way. Now, when we talk about the wars against Mashiach, I just found certain things which brought me to incredible conclusions, which I'm just going to share with you very quickly. We spoke about the fourth hour. We spoke about the fourth hour, and it said that in the fourth hour, the soul of Adam Harishon was given to him. The fourth hour of the sixth day. And we said that's when Eretz Yisrael began to be rebuilt. Of course, there's something much more significant. This is what the Abarbanel says, is the soul of Adam Harishon coming to Adam's body in the fourth hour of the sixth day also represents the soul of Mashiach descending into this world in the fourth hour, which means that the soul of Mashiach had to come to this world in the early 1900s. Now the Gra says something very incredible. He says he wrote a whole sefer about Mashiach. It's called Kol HaTorah. It's written by a student of his, of things that I heard from the Gra about Mashiach. And he reveals there are amazing things. He says that Mashiach has a whole career before the redemption. And actually this is explicit in the Rambam, but the Gra goes into detail and he tells us exactly what Mashiach is going to accomplish and how we could identify Mashiach before the redemption. The Gra explains that there are two modes, or there are two levels and phases that Mashiach goes through. One is called the phase of Mashiach ben Yosef, and one is called Mashiach ben David. We know the biblical Yosef was a great and holy tzaddik, but nobody knew he was a tzaddik. The brothers actually tried to kill him. They thought he was very wicked and evil. He was such a great tzaddik, it's explained in Kabbalistic and Hasidic Svarim, that nobody had any idea or inkling into the heights of his soul. The brothers actually thought he was so completely hidden, his holiness was so completely hidden, that not only didn't they realize what a great tzaddik he was, they thought he was a Russian and they wanted to kill him. The Egyptians, they thought he was king of Egypt. They thought he was a king interested in building the infrastructure and building the Tumah of Egypt. In a sense, when Yosef was king of Egypt, it says he was manipulating the most spiritual forces in trying to extract the power of Egypt. So in other words, Yosef was doing things, people didn't realize what was going on. He was acting and functioning in complete secrecy. And this is how the Zohar explains, this is how before Mashiach comes, the way to fight the Sitra Achra, the Nachash, the power of the Nachash, of the snake, is with Arminius, is with trickery. And the way to fight him is on his ground and with his level. We have to fight him with trickery. He doesn't realize what's going on. That's why when Mashiach is born, the whole ancestry of Mashiach is very, very difficult to understand. The father of Mashiach came from an illicit relationship, a seemingly illicit relationship between Yehuda and Tamar. The mother of Mashiach from Rus, the whole relationship with Ruth and Boaz is something which, from a moral point of view, is very strange to understand. The whole birth and recreation of Mashiach is something which happened in a very armimistic way, something that was very, very unclear. The Zohar explains that Mashiach functions before the redemption. He's also controlling and guiding Klal Yisrael, but in a very, very secret way. Nobody knows what he's doing. He says he's rebuilding Eretz Yisrael, but nobody knows it's him. Nobody knows it's him. They think somebody else is doing it, but he's doing it. Now, if Eretz Yisrael began to be rebuilt in the early 1900s, when I told you 20,000 Jews came from the Soviet Union, if Mashiach was doing it, when that impetus started, when that first migration to Eretz Yisrael, that began the current rebirth of Eretz Yisrael, Mashiach had been born then. So that means that in early 1900s, Mashiach was there, and his neshama descended to this world, and that gave the power for Eretz Yisrael to start to be rebuilt. We know the next major phase in the rebuilding of Eretz Yisrael occurred when? Well, we know the secular state was established in 1948. We don't celebrate 1948 or Independence Day for the simple reason that Independence Day was not a happy day, because Independence Day started a war in which thousands and thousands of Jews died. Over 6,000 Jews, more than any other war, died in that. So when we celebrate Purim, for example, we celebrate a holiday after the Jews finished and succeeded in winning over their enemies. We don't celebrate the beginning of the war, we celebrate the end. That's why we don't celebrate religious Jews. Of course, we realize that the creation of Eretz Yisrael is a miraculousness, but the date of independence with the secular state gives significance to, because non-Jews give significance to a declaration of independence. To us, that declaration of independence is meaningless, because that began the war which so many Jews lost their lives. When things started settling down and the war was over and people started rebuilding, coming to Eretz Yisrael, wasn't until 1950. 1950, about 200,000 Jews, the greatest influx of Jews in one concentrated period of time occurred over, the entire Iraqi population, the Jews of Babylon that were living in that area from the time of the first Beis Hamikdash. 100,000 Jews, boom, came to Eretz Yisrael in one shot. 50,000 Jews from Yemen in one shot, in one operation, came to Eretz Yisrael. That's the year which we celebrate, and that's really what began the next stage. So in other words, in Mashiach's life, that year is very significant. We know something incredible happened to Mashiach because all this power suddenly from everywhere coming to Eretz Yisrael, and a major new stage in the development of Eretz Yisrael is occurring. And according to Gra, this is also the power of Mashiach. So something to parallel the life of Mashiach must have occurred around that year of 1950 to make this happen. The Gra says further, what other signs do we know? The Rambam just gives us a sign of somebody who's involved in bringing Jews closer to God. The Rambam says, of course, that Mashiach, how do we identify Mashiach? The one who's doing the things which are necessary to prepare the world for redemption. Obviously, Mashiach is the one who's going to bring about the Geula, so he is the primary force, the mover and the shaker behind all the events which are necessary to bring about the redemption. So we mentioned before the birth of Eretz Yisrael, which the Gra is going to happen in a very secret way. We're not going to know he's involved unless we look at the dates, 1950, and something is happening to Mashiach, the early 1900s. We have to look at the dates, but it's not in a revealed way. What is Mashiach doing in a revealed way? So the Rambam says, of course, he's bringing Jews closer to God. What does the Gra say? Specifically, Mashiach is teaching day and night Pnimius Torah. We mentioned before that teaching the inner essence, the inner dynamics of Torah are necessary before Mashiach comes. Why is that so? Because to understand ourselves and to understand God and to understand our relationship are necessary prerequisites before Mashiach comes. So an individual in the pre-Geula state, we have to look for an individual who's primarily involved in spreading not the revealed aspects of Torah, which there are many, many great rabbis which are doing that, but somebody who's primarily, the Gra says, focusing on the inner teachings of Torah. The Gra also says, this is all, you could look it up in his book, he says clearly, that something major is going to change after Mashiach comes, is that non-Jews are going to start learning about Judaism. They're going to give up all the other religions and start learning about the truth of God and the truth of Judaism. So therefore, he says that before Mashiach comes in the pre-Geula states, Mashiach is going to be somebody, a Jewish leader, who's going to take an interest in non-Jews and try to bring them closer also to the truth. Now you have to understand this is a very unique phenomenon, because throughout the duration of exile, no Jewish leader ever took an interest in the non-Jews, because if you did, you got your head cut off. The non-Jews were not interested in hearing anything from any Jewish leader or rabbi about what the true meaning of life or what's the true path of righteousness. The only time when it's possible when society is free enough to be able to understand other views and listen to other views is only after the Second World War. So the only time it was possible was only in our generation. But this individual who's going to function as Mashiach in the pre-Geula period is already making these preparations. This is explicit in the words of the Gra. Now there's one other function that Mashiach has to go through, because he is the one that has to bring about the Geula, and this is a very, very painful thing which we're going to conclude with. In order for the Jewish people to become one with God, I don't want to go into at length to explain this, it's a very, very deep concept, but we have to become godly. You can't have a human being cannot have a relationship, unless you're insane, with an animal. Some people do that today, but it's not normally recognized as a proper form of relationship. You can't have a relationship with anything else except for another human being of the opposite sex. Now, for the Jews, for God to have a meaningful relationship to Jews, Jews have to be like God. Jews have to become godly. How does a finite human being become godly? So there's a whole process based on our self-sacrifice and devotion to God that we slowly but surely purify ourselves and become more and more godly. But there's in the Kabbalah it explains that it's necessary to go through a certain process of nullification, where all your human faculties and all your human powers and all your human forms of expression have to be nullified in order for the godly to take over. Now this experience is a very, very painful one, because you losing your identity as a human being and becoming into a godly being, and it's a very painful process, but every Jew does not have to go through this on himself. It's explained in Kabbalah that Moshiach does this for us. Moshiach has to go through a very, very painful process in where the finite attributes of humanness have to become nullified in order for him to become a completely godly being, and thereby initiate the process of Geula. Another thing the Medrash says very interestingly is that in order to have a meaningful relationship with somebody, you have to understand what they went through in their experiences. If you don't understand, if somebody's coming into a relationship, you don't understand anything about the history of the individual that you're going through, you don't understand their experiences and their past history, you're not going to have a meaningful relationship. Now, throughout the duration of Galus, it says that we have a concept of Shchinta Begalusa, the Shechina, God, the presence, the manifest presence of God in this world was in Galus. What does that mean? The excruciating pain that God went throughout the exile. Think about God during the Holocaust, when for some reason which we cannot understand, God was in prison, and he had to watch his children suffer and die. Again, not going to attempt to understand why this is so, and why it had to be this so. But this was necessary. God had to watch it happen and was unable to lift a finger. God had experienced the entire duration of exile, watching his beloved children suffer, and for various reasons had to sit by quietly and watch, and was in prison, was unable to even say, hey guys, I'm here, I'm with you, I'm watching. He wasn't even able to call out to them and say, I know you're suffering, but I'm with you, it's almost over. There was no prophecy, there was no communication. God was completely imprisoned and even unable to lift a finger or communicate to us. And this was a terribly painful experience that God went through for a duration of 2,000 years. The Medrash says that Moshiach, before the Jews enter this relationship with God, the Jews have to go through that experience. And Moshiach, as the representative of the Jews, has to go through that same experience of being in prison, of not being able to lift a finger, to watch his people, to watch the Jewish people who Moshiach loves, to watch them going through a very, very difficult time period and not able to lift a finger to help. And not only not able to help, but not even able to communicate. This is explicit in verses in Isaiah. We have no time to go through the actual sources. And explicit in Medrashim, in Psikta, that this is the case. This is the final thing that Mashiach has to go through before the time of redemption. Now, there's one last code. We didn't have time to go through a lot of codes. There's one last code that I have to share with you. There's an amazing prophecy of the Chafetz Chaim. The Chafetz Chaim said that he knows that right before Mashiach comes, the great Jewish leaders are going to be told or know somehow that Mashiach is going to come. And they're going to tell the Jewish people that we know Mashiach is coming very soon. It's time for you to make serious preparations. The Chafetz Chaim prophesies that most Jews will not take this call seriously. And he shows in the Torah where this is prophesied. He explains the whole story of Sarah. Sarah was told, I mentioned to you before, at a very advanced age, that she was going to get a child, and she laughed. She laughed because she didn't believe, or she couldn't completely believe. And the Chavetz Chaim goes into a lengthy explanation that the Torah does not say bad things about the patriarchs or the matriarchs for no reason, but it's giving us a lesson, and it's telling us a prophecy that even somebody who's very righteous like Sarah, sometimes when incredible news happens, it's hard to believe. And the Torah is telling us that before Moshiach comes, the news of the redemption, it's going to be hard even for righteous people to believe. And nonetheless, that's going to be the truth. Now, there's two incredible codes that I found. We know that we had there's a very, very similar test the Jews went through when they received the Torah from Mount Sinai. Moses said he's going up to Sinai to receive the Torah. He said he's going to be there for 40 days and 40 nights. He's going to come back. And many Jews counted the 40 days and 40 nights, and Moses did not appear, so they feared that Moses had died. In fact, Satan had the power to project an illusion of Moses on his deathbed, the corpse of Moses. And the Jews saw this corpse of Moses, and they say, Moses promised he's going to come back, but it looks like he's not coming back. And that's why some Jews, the Erev Rav specifically, they were involved in making the egel, the calf, to take over from the position of Moses. Now, this again was the start, the first step, the first Nisayan, the first test that the Jews had when they became Jews, when they accepted the Torah at Sinai, was this test. This was a very, very important to establish at step one, that when Jewish leaders tell you something, it's going to happen. It doesn't matter even if you see him, you see Moses' corpse. They didn't think it was an illusion or a projection. They thought it was actual. It doesn't matter. Even if it's so clear to you in front of your eyes, Moses says, I'm coming back in 40 days, and in 40 days Moses is a corpse. You see it with your own eyes. It doesn't make a difference. If Moses says he's going to be back, he's going to be back. Forget about your eyes. Forget about what you think. If a Jewish leader like Moses tells you that this is going to happen, it doesn't matter what you see. It doesn't matter if you see his corpse right in front of you. And this had to be established from day one, because without the encouragement and the guidance of Jewish leaders, we never would have got to this day. We never would have survived the difficulties of Golus if we would have doubted the direction and the leadership which the Gedalah, which the leaders of the Jewish people gave us. We had to have this unbelievable faith in every word that they say. I'm going to share with you two codes now, and with this we're going to conclude. This is the story of the Egel. The story that I just told you about, when Moses did not come down after they made a mistake in calculations, they thought he was not coming down. This is the story of the golden calf. This is a story of that terrible test that the Jews went through to see if their belief in the Gedalah Yisrael, if their belief in Jewish leaders is going to be unshakable. Now, if we look at that parsha, if you count exact equal intervals of 49 letters, the Torah is telling us that this terrible test is going to be repeated by another Jewish leader who's going to proclaim something, and it's going to be hard to believe. It's obvious from what I told you before, all the signs, how to identify Moshiach, who I'm referring to. There is no other leader in our generation. The soul of the Rebbe Zal Gesundsein descended to this planet in the early 1900s, exactly at the conclusion of the 4th hour, when the soul of Adam Harishan entered into his body. From that period onwards, Eretz Yisrael began to be rebuilt. In 1950, the Rebbe became leader of Lubavitch, and he stood on his feet. And that's exactly parallels the 5th hour. 1950 is 5 hours into the 6th day, And that is exactly when Eretz Yisrael began to really be rebuilt, and hundreds of thousands of Jews from all over the world began to build the current state of Israel. The Rebbe is the only one in our generation who has dedicated his life towards bringing Jews. There are many people that were involved in certain aspects and certain things, but the one who has dedicated his life to bring Jews closer to God, to spread it even to non-Jews, and primarily to spread Pnimius HaTorah, which the Gra said these are the fundamental signs to identify Mashiach, is of course the Lubavitcher Rebbe. Now we see the Torah is clearly prophesying that there's going to be a similar test. Just like in time of Moshe Rabbeinu said, I'm coming back, and the Jews counted, some of the Jews counted, and it didn't look like he's coming back. In fact, they thought they saw Moses like that. It's prophesied here that it's going to happen again with another Jewish leader. The prophecy of the Chafetz Chaim, which I mentioned to you before, this is what we're going to conclude. Okay, this is the story. That story which I just told you that Sarah laughed. Vatitzchak Sarah Bikirba, when Sarah was told this incredible news that Mashiach is coming, she did not believe. And the Chafetz Chaim says this means the Torah is not telling us stories. The Torah doesn't want to tell us that Sarah didn't believe just to tell us something bad about Sarah the Tzadekis. The Torah is telling us, you should realize that even Sarah the Tzadekis, when God, she didn't doubt that God told her. Avram Avinu told her in the name of God that you're going to have a child. Was there any question that Avram Avinu was lying? Of course not. But even the great and holy righteous Sarah, when she was told this incredible news, she laughed. It was hard for her to accept it. And the Chafetz Chaim says, the Torah is teaching you something here. That when Mashiach comes, even righteous people, it's going to be hard to accept because it's going to be incredible. And this is the portion, according to the Chafetz Chaim. Now, the most significant codes, the one I showed you before, with the Rebbe's name, the most significant codes we find are, interestingly, with intervals of 7 or 49. The significance of these numbers doesn't have to be elaborated. They're very significant in Judaism. 7 really defines the essence of creation. And we found the Rebbe's name in equal intervals of 49. Now, in this very parsha that the Chafetz Chaim said is prophesizing that there's going to come a time that an individual is going to tell people that Mashiach is coming, and it's going to be doubted, just like Sarah doubted. The Torah tells us exactly who is the person. Now, there are many people that have various names that are called rabbi, or this Rebbe or that Rebbe. The only individual who we know when we say the Rebbe, we know who we're referring to. The Rebbe Zal Gesund Sein is the one which clearly prophesied in exact equal intervals of 49 in that very Torah portion, which is teaching us this lesson, that when God tells you something, even if it's so unbelievable, that Sarah is going to get a child in her 90s, and it's going to be very hard to believe, don't laugh, Sarah. Even if in front of your eyes it looks like it's not happening, don't laugh. Because when a tzaddik tells you it's going to happen, there's no question that it's going to happen. And that's the last and final stage which we're going through right now, is this last test to see if we could stand firm. And even though we see things that are difficult to understand and comprehend, we realize that the message of the Rebbe is saying, Higir Zman Goleschem, there's no question whatsoever that it's going to materialize. No question in the very near future. I promised you at the beginning of the lecture that I will tell you when Mashiach is going to come. I was a little dishonest about it because nobody knows exactly when he's going to come. I will tell you, though, when is the latest possible time, when I don't think it's possible that Mashiach could come any later than that. Of course, he could come right now this second. Or it could be he came already, and no one wants to disturb us by telling us. But there's no question that it can't be past a certain period of time, and I'm going to suggest the following. Again, nobody knows for sure, but I don't think it could be possibly in any event more than a year from now, simply for for several reasons, and I'm just going to share a couple of them with you. We said before that the Holocaust was the excruciating birth pangs of Mashiach. Now, a woman does not go through birth pangs days before she gets a child. The birth pangs are when the child is being born. When the last moments before the child is born, the pains, the terrible, excruciating pains of childbirth occur. Now, of course, when we're talking about a cosmic clock where 1,000 years is only a day, so moments can mean years. But how many years could mean moments? We have a concept in Jewish law of a yovel, 50 years. 50 years, according to the Torah, is called la'olam. We say that after 50 years you have to free a slave. You're not allowed to work with them forever. Forever is identified in the Torah as 50 years. In other words, if you keep him for 50 years, it's like you kept him forever. So the longest duration of time we could consider two events occurring within a certain time frame, as they consider them as occurring in the same time period, is in a 50-year period. Now, at the beginning of the Holocaust began, we know the Second World War began in 1939, but the actual Holocaust began in 1941. So exactly 50 years from the beginning of the Holocaust was when the Rebbe announced that the Zman of the Geula began. Now, when is this process of preparation, the final preparations for Mashiach, going to end? I would suggest that it absolutely, definitely cannot last more than 50 years. Because if it does last more than 50 years, that means you have an entire period of forever between the birth pangs and the actual birth, which does not make any sense and is unjustifiable. So there's no question that the last possible time period for Mashiach to happen is not more than a year from now. Again, I tell you, this is the last possible moment, but of course, not the earliest. There's about 6 or 7 reasons why I may suggest. I'm just going to tell you 1 or 2 more. The Gemara says clearly that Mashiach is supposed to be ultimately revealed in the year following the Shemitah, and it says exactly what's going to happen in a 3-year progression before Mashiach comes. 1 year, people are going to announce that Mashiach is coming. The next year, there's going to be terrible wars and fighting, and the next year, Mashiach is going to be revealed. The Shemitah year is going to be a year of Milchama, the Gemara says in Sanhedrin. The following year is going to be the year of revelation of Mashiach. Now, we know that people started announcing that Mashiach is coming. The songs, Baruch Haba Melech HaMashiach, other things, signs going up all over the world. That began last year when we had, it was at that point controversial. Now it's already accepted. Everybody knows. We're already singing Baruch Haba Melech HaMashiach. So the signs that the Gemara says that Mashiach is going to be announced is coming already occurred. This is a year of Milchama, which I told you, this should have been a year of terrible wars, where all the nations of the world are getting together and trying to fight the Jewish people. Because of the long duration of exile, it's happening in a very, very subtle way, but the nations of the world are trying to pressure the Jewish people to give up parts of Eretz Yisrael to the Arabs, and explicitly Yerushalayim. So this is a year which should have been a year of Milchama. It's also, unfortunately, a year of there's a lot of divisiveness and machlekes in the world within Lubavitch. This, of course, was also clearly prophesied. It'll be a year of Milchama, and the latest possible time, again, I always stress, has to be no later than, again, I'm not a prophet, and I don't know these things for sure. It's just a suggestion. Just to conclude, again, the bottom line is now there's absolutely not the slightest doubt, should be in our minds. Again, what I share to you tonight is, to be honest with you, it's just a tipa min hayam, just a drop in the bucket. We could go on and on for hours. I could show you, numerous scores and scores of prophecies and codes, and to show you everything that occurred throughout Jewish history, and specifically the last number of years. Everything was clearly prophesied. Everything happened right on the button. Chatzeis Yom Shishi, noontime comes, bang, scuds, Mashiach is here. Everything happened exactly when it was supposed to happen. The Soviet Union fell apart exactly when it was supposed to happen. It was supposed to happen on Hanukkah. It was in 1992, on the last day of Hanukkah, that the Soviet Union fell apart, because Hanukkah is a celebration against those that oppress Judaism, and the Soviet Union oppressed Judaism. Purim was the time when Saddam Hussein finally fell, and that's when we celebrate. We're going to celebrate in a couple of, just very shortly, when those that want to destroy the Jews fall. Everything happened exactly when it's supposed to happen, at the precise time, at the precise year. Everything that we're going through now, even the difficulties and the terrible suffering that we have to watch, that Mashiach has to go through, it should be ended right away, is something which was clearly prophesied, the exact condition of the Rebbe. Everything is going through, from his unableness to speak, from his difficulty in seeing, his difficulty in moving about, the difficulties that are in his environment. Everything is clearly prophesied to the exact minute detail. To think that any of these things should be a cause of depression is silly. Of course, it's a cause of sadness when we see that the Rebbe in such a condition, but we cannot be depressed. Just going to end you with a little story. A couple of days ago, I met a friend of mine who was very depressed, and I asked him why he's depressed. He said he put a lot of money into stocks, and he lost a lot of money. I said, what happened to a smart guy like you? Put all this money in, where's your brains? I know you're much more prudent than that. How did this happen? And I'll tell you, I have a stockbroker who I've been using for the last 20 years, who was incredible. For 20 years, everything he told me was bing, bang, on the button. Every stock he told me to invest, I made a lot of money on. And he told me to put into this stock. And he told me to put a lot of money into it, and he said, I'll be rich. So I did, and now I lost a lot of money. So I said, how did he make such a mistake? I mean, how do you account for that? Well, he says, actually, he didn't really make a mistake. He told me that, the beginning of 1994, for a couple of months, the stock is going to go really in the red. But he told me then to hold on to it, and eventually it's going to make a lot of money. So I'm looking at this guy as if he's insane. You have a stockbroker for 20 years. He told you everything he told you was precisely on the nose, never missed. And he tells you that this stock is going to make a lot of money. Even if he would have not told you that for a couple of months it's going to go down, you should have believed that this person, being such an expert, probably it's going to go up. When he tells you explicitly that for a couple of months in the beginning of 1994 the stock is going to lose money, so you're depressed, it's exactly what he told you is going to happen. This is precisely what's going to happen. In a few months it's going to pick up and you're going to make a lot of money on it. Why in the world are you depressed? Now that's the situation we find ourselves in right now. We know we're going through a very, very difficult time, but everything was told to us. Predictions that the Rebbe told us throughout his career, for 40 years, everything being on the button. Nothing that he said fell. Everything was precisely and accurately happened. And we know, clearly prophesied in who knows how many places, that what has to happen before Moshiach comes. So to be depressed is really a silly response. Of course, to be concerned and to pray and to mispal every day that the Yisurim of Moshiach should end. But it's not a time for depression, it's a time for joy, and to enjoy these last moments and prepare for the ultimate coming of Moshiach. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi Weisberg. The Rebbe said a while back that one of the things one has to do to prepare himself for Mashiach is to study the subjects of Mashiach in the different parts of Torah. We have definitely done this tonight with Rabbi Weisberg. He has taken us a big tour of all the aspects of Torah. May this be the last time that we have to study Torah in Golus, and together we should all say, as the Rebbe said, that by proclaiming this, by accepting this helps him and gives him life and health. So we should all say together, Yechi Adoneinu, Moreinu, V'Rabbeinu, Melech HaMoshiach, Le'olam Voed. There is some refreshments on the side, and for those who want to go to further course with Rabbi Weisberg, he's staying here with you. Now? For those who are interested to eventually get those tapes from tonight's expose, they will be available at the Chabad Resource Center with Rabbi Tzekling. Thank you.
So it's Chatzos Yom Shishi. Mashiach takes us till Shabbos and makes us ready for him. At the year 7,000, the world becomes a completely different world. Becomes destroyed. The year right. The year 6,000 for the 7th
But
year.
this 50-year period, why did it have to start just when you said? Why did it start when any other tragedy happened in this 50-year period of the birth pains?
Well, the most difficult, like the Gross says, I mean, pregnancy is difficult for a lot of women, but the most difficult and crucial time, I mean, you can't compare the Holocaust in any way to anything, for the horror and the numbers involved. You can't compare it in any way to what the Jews went through. It's definitely, in retrospect, the actual birth pangs, not only the difficulty of pregnancy, but the actual birth pangs. And if it ended 50 years ago, 49 years ago, I mean, to say that Hashem is going to schlep it out more than that, it doesn't, again, it's...
Hashem might have a reason for it. You might, theoretically, with all due respect, you might be wrong. It might not be in a year from now. You're saying the latest possible.
I suggested.
You suggested.
But I'm not theorizing.
No, but you're saying from all the evidence, there cannot be any possibility that it will be more than a year from now. That's the way
we have to try to understand. I mean, I didn't want to go into detail, but the reason why all these things were given to us, people say, why do you get involved? Just sit back and wait. I think all this knowledge, all these prophets given us, we should learn them and experience them and try to learn from them. To say that all this simanim that the Gemara gave us about Eretz Yisrael, about the Holocaust, we're there to ignore. That we
sure
just...
don't, but maybe they'll change his mind at the last minute. They'll say,
So
we'll do a few more
right
years.
now we have to try to understand the things the best we can. If I make a mistake, obviously...
No, but maybe God will change his mind. Maybe it's supposed to come, then God will change his mind in the next year or so and say, well, maybe the people need more, another 5 years or so, another 10 years. How do you know that won't
Anything
happen?
is possible. That doesn't mean it'll happen.
Let's hope he made a mistake the other way and we won't have to wait the year.
Anyway, thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
Let me
make a little point here. I don't know if you know, you like Kamachi a lot. If you take Yechia Dinim Rein, if I've been a Malcolm Moshiach Leilam Poet, and you take the first letter of each of the words, and you add them all up, they equal 138. I don't know if you could say it's coincidentally the Rebbe's first name also equals 138.
That's interesting. Thank you. Very interesting.
I don't know if you've ever heard of that.
I never heard of it. Thanks.
There's another interesting
I find
point.
it very interesting.
Take
that many
notes
of
of what
these
you hear tonight,
prophecies- Many of these prophecies come from the Gra. The higher opposing forces. Do you have any insight into why that comes that way? I have a theory about that, but
Well, definitely. I mean,
that's coming a tricky way. Not everyone.
exactly, that's part of it. And therefore, to influence the other side that is opposing basically this concept, it has to come from their sources.
Well,
Who they rely on.
Well, the whole thing of the Snagis was because Chassidus had to be, couldn't be completely revealed. But the Tzidkus of Yeshiva is not completely revealed. As we near the Yisraelis of Mashiach, so the chief source of the Snagis is actually the chief source to identify Mashiach, which means a complete tikkun of the, what should we call it? I mean, the Gra, people question, I use the Gra a lot. I mean, the Alter Rebbe had a lot of respect for the Gra. He calls him a Gain and a
No,
Chassid.
I'm not...
There's no question that his words are true. I mean,
First of all, he was a big Makol.
he talks more. The Gra talks more about learning Pnimis HaTorah than the Alter Rebbe does. You find a few Maimorim talk about actual the chiv of learning Pnimis HaTorah. The Gra talks about it non-stop in their own place. And the Snagis Gedolim, and that's such an incredible inconsistency that you see in the Snagis world. They all cook in the Gra, they cook in the Mesilas Yesharim, they cook in all the Torah. These same people are the ones that said that without Pnimis HaTorah you're completely lost. The Gra said you're Namoris in Migla if you don't know Pnimis HaTorah. You can't pass in a halacha l'maisa if you don't know what the Torah is. It's an incredible hester that, just like the brothers of Yeshua, I mean, I'm not, there was a tzaddikim, but they weren't able to see, for some reason, the Tzaddim weren't able to see. I mean, it's in front of their eyes, the same Mesilas Yesharim, the same book that they've been learning all these years. Actually, in the Mesilas Yesharim, the edition that's used in all yeshivas, in the back of it, there's a little kuncha to him, that's 3 or 4 pages. And this is printed in all the editions of the Mesilas Yesharim, it's sitting in all yeshivas. It's called the Shabbat of the Mesilas Yesharim, about the chiv of learning Pnimis HaTorah. He goes through all the reasons that you don't want to learn Pnimis HaTorah, all the reasons that you hear that it's hard to understand, and I'm too young, and I'm not a tzaddik, and first I'll learn Nigla. He goes through step by step all the reasons. He says why they're all not valid, and it's sitting on their shelves in the same book in the back page.
That's the problem. It's on the shelf.
No, but they learn the book, but they never get to the end. But it's incredible hester. I'm not trying to put him down. I'm trying to show that the scoop of Mashiach ben David is that the Rebbe should have such a Snagis. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. I mean, look, people don't agree with certain things Lubavitch does, but the amount of bizyanus and the amount of ridicule that Lubavitch and the Rebbe suffered all these years is completely unbelievable. I mean, the Rebbe is no question. I mean, if you don't like this, you don't like that. There's no question. He's a Rebbe Yisrael. It's a kin and it's a hester.
Yeah.
But the Rebbe is something, it's so visible what he does. All his books are accessible to everyone. The accomplishments of Lubavitch are in front of everyone's eyes. It's not like, it's not like
They're blinded.
It's a
I
hester.
asked Tessin that same question, and he finds it very hard to come to the conclusion that the Rebbe could be Mashiach. He fights it.
Yeah.
And it's very, very interesting. We had him in camp, and we're having him again this week, and next week rather. And he says that the Rebbe should fit all the criteria. Chassidus is the right way. In fact, he learned in Lakewood. He sends his children to a Chassidus yeshiva.
Yeah.
What did he say? He says, why? I asked him why. He says, because he didn't have years for mine. It's a quote from him. I listened to him. Mendel Kessin, Rabbi Mendel Kessin. He writes a lot on this also, and
I took it one of my things from him, but his whole thing that, first of all, he's projecting like long into the future. He's talking eventually.
No, he's now starting to gear himself towards a closer format.
Oh yeah. Good.
I told him ultimately I think they're going to come back to the concept of 770. He didn't like that, but he didn't dispute it. Because I think ultimately he has his mind open and he's trying to find the answer, and he's going to keep on pointing in the same direction.
There's also a lot of ayahs that Esav, I mean, the Rebbe says that Esav was right in this part. There's a lot of ayahs that our main problem with Esav is already finished. And he's building the whole thing on Esav now, not on Yishmael. And Isaiah and all the sources say that our problem before Mashiach comes is not with Esav. Esav is inspired. The head of Esav in Larson will say, well, he has to say he has a ticket. So that whole gang is really...
But there's one left beer of Esav. Isser Zalman Weisberg we state this Hara Esav.
It's after. It's Mama's Mashiach.
Well, in other words, in other words, Mashiach will complete the Bira of
Right.
Esav.
The Rebbe said the Bira that's necessary before Mashiach comes occurs. There's a final Bira that actually happens after Mashiach comes.
It's interesting to note that in Daniel, he gives two time periods. He says 1290 years
45 years
and another
apart.
45 years.
That's
And the
another
Rebbe
thing I wanted to
declared
mention.
45 years after the Milchama ended,
Right.
he declared the coming of Mashiach.
You're right. I wanted to mention that.
This talking is backwards. What is it?
My computer won't present.
No, but it's still,
It's still text, yeah. No, it's printed as backwards.
it is still reading it backwards.
It doesn't fit this way. It only fits the other way. Count the letters in the actual program.
Okay. Someone just showed me also, the son. He counts from this men,
Yeah.
5 letters.
I told Mashiach. I just found out.
Mashiach, Lamei, Men, Yud, Tet.
The guy who writes on Daniel and says,
Lamei, unto the left of the Eichaya.
who's reading Zayis on Daniel. It's the whole thing, but he prophesies more.
What's the name of it? In English?
Mundane Shakespeare or which college you actually mentioned. And that's because and it is an interesting thing, first of all, because you think something as convincing as this, that the Rebbe, who is definitely not shy of using different technologies to further and to bring the message of Chassidus to people, would not encourage such things. Number one, why doesn't the Rebbe encourage it, which has always made me suspicious? And number two, what about the original people who developed these systems are starting to lose faith in it? What is this?
First of all, as far as the Rebbe says, the Rebbe's avodah is to spread Yiddish Torah, not code. The Rebbe always says use every method possible to spread Yiddish Torah. He never.
television, video rates, and not about
I was once to bring that and said it was a Pagisha time, and the Rebbe was saying that he said explicitly we have to try to use every type of proof that's based on Mitzvah. He spoke there about the proof that yeah, he explained that one of the proofs that they use is the fact that it says how many kosher animals there are, and there's only season that. These are proofs. And the Rebbe said the Chahena that there's other proofs that have to be used to teach. The Rebbe's opinion is not to try to teach Shema Hashemayim. The Rebbe's opinion is to teach Mitzvah Torah. And he turns to the fact that the Rebbe doesn't endorse it, the fact that the codes exist, there are much clearly that one of the ways of interpreting Torah is to look through equal intervals. It doesn't try to remain them. So we know that it's a true chacham. The question is, these specific codes are right is one thing, but the fact that codes are there and that they're emes is unquestionable. The Ramban also alludes to it in the Hashem Chumash.